Welcome to the NOMA series of interviews for International Women's Day 2022. Today we get to know Belinda, an agile coach who is new to the NOMA's team, and Edwina, our Chief Operating Officer. We hope you enjoyed this wonderful conversation.
Hi Belinda and Eddie, I'm so excited to have you both here today and to interview you for the International Women's Day series that we're doing. Very quickly, Belinda, let's start with you. Can you tell me a little bit about your past? Where were you born, where you grew up, where your family's from?
Hi, thanks, Sam. I'm very happy to be here. I grew up in Melbourne, born and raised west side of Melbourne. My parents were immigrants from Vietnam. Went to school at Deer Park West Primary School, if anybody knows where Deer Park is. And then high school was in Taylor's Lake, which was further away, about 20-minute drive every day for mum. Then went to school at Melbourne Uni, so in the city, and now I'm still living in the west side, so staying true to where the roots are.
That is fantastic. Eddie, same question.
Beautiful, thank you. Thank you, Sam. Thanks for having me. Where was I born? I was born in Western Sydney. I'm a Westie. And I grew up out in Castlereagh on acreage, on 5 acres in the bush. You couldn't see the neighbours. I grew up like chopping sticks and walking through the bush to the bamboo, thinking that we're going on an amazing adventure. And it was only a few 100 meters from the house, but the bush was all around. So I felt like we were, lost in the middle of the jungle. My parents are also immigrants. They emigrated from Ireland in the 70s. And they've now lived in Australia longer, obviously a lot longer than they lived in Ireland. So I grew up with a big Irish community, kind of typical Irish. They love to hang around other Irish people. When I was growing up, I thought that adults had Irish accents and kids had Australian accents. I didn't kind of realize that adults could also have Australian accents. That's pretty much me.
Fantastic. Well, the next question was, what culture do you most identify with? And I feel like you both have gone into that a little bit. So why don't we roll the next two questions into one? What culture do you most identify with, and what kind of person were you as a child and as a teenager? And do those two kind of correlate? Let's go. I'm going to ask Eddie first.
Thank you. Great question. It's really funny. In some ways, I do really identify with my Irish culture, and then in some ways I really don't. But I guess growing up, I did notice that my family was different to Australian families in the sense, and I suppose it's not everyone, maybe it was also being a big family. I'm one of 4 kids, like big-ish. And maybe as well, Sam, you'll know this with like your Maltese family. There's not a big generation gap. Kids weren't separated from adults when hanging out. As a kid, like you'd be very much with the parents, the kids, everyone would be intermingled. You weren't really treated necessarily like a kid. So I think like when I'd go to my other friends' houses, like it was a bit more segregated, and you had to be like really polite to parents. Not that I wasn't polite to my parents, but I don't know, it was like a less of a hierarchical relationship. So I did notice it was just kind of a bit more of a free-for-all and a little bit wild in my household growing up, which I think, like an Irish Ceilidh or something, everyone talks over the top of each other, the music's going. So I guess I do identify that. And then I have since gone to Ireland quite a few times. And when I got there, the penny dropped, like the culture of Irish people, I realized how much I had that growing up, and it is very, very different to Australian culture.
Oh yeah, I emphasize with that a lot. Belinda, do you want me to ask the question again, or how you feeling?
I think I got it. So what culture we identify most with, and how that was, I guess, impacted us growing up. I guess growing up, I identified more being Asian than Asian Australian, purely because I was surrounded by, I guess, a lot of books and tutoring. Mom and dad being immigrants, and had a really tough time setting themselves out in Australia. They focused a lot on the learning aspect and making sure that, you know, we have a strong setup. And so the I guess the hardworking culture that we see a lot in the Asian community was really pushed hard onto myself and my two sisters. And so I think it was very different growing up in that kind of environment at home, and then at school, where I see a lot of my friends just kind of after school, they drop their bag and they're running into the playground. Never would that have happened in my household. It was like we switch out our backpacks for our tutoring backpacks and off we go. We're studying more, kind of thing. And to Eddie's point, like when you don't feel any hierarchy, there was a lot of hierarchy within my family. You had to respect the elders, there's grandparents, and then mom and dad, and then us. At the dinner table, it was very nice and it was really joyful, but we would not touch the food until everybody's seated. We, you know, say grandparents eat, like, you know, they take the first pieces, and then it would be down the trail kind of thing. And dad really, I think he missed that because he was an orphan, so he never had that family, I guess the hierarchy or what we call it, and he really tried to enforce that in the house, so that, you know, he wanted to instill the respect that we need to have for our elders, as opposed to he didn't want us to, I guess, be too easygoing and just say hi and bye and just like, wait, I'm going kind of thing to our elders. It's more of like, you know, the tradition of crossing your arms, bowing down. It's like, hey, I'm going to leave now, and just like announcing that. And then when you go home, it's like, I'm home now kind of thing. Very basic stuff, but very, very strong Asian culture when I was growing up. And I think that really kind of helps me root myself now. But yeah, that was me.
Eddie.
Thank you for sharing that. It's really interesting. I do like it made me realize I'd maybe tiny bit misconstrued. There were some rules, especially around manners, but I didn't actually have any grandparents. There's only 4 Australians in my family. Everyone else is Irish, like, you know, I don't know how many hundreds of people. So I didn't have any grandparents or anything like that. So I guess we were quite like satellite isolated. But there was, my dad definitely got his dinner first, 100%. He sat at the table first, but it's actually not very good. He sat at the dinner table first, got his meal, and he was nearly finished his meal by the time the rest of us sat down. He'd be getting his seconds. So it's like a little bit of some rules, but also, I don't know, a kind of there was also not the best decorum ever as well.
I'm still stuck on the concept of having both a school backpack and a tutoring backpack.
Yeah, that's a lot.
It was, not gonna lie, but you learn stuff from the challenges, right?
Hey, that is absolutely true.
I would fib and say I'd done my homework at school. So my mum sometimes got home from work after us and she wouldn't know. I'd feel bad. And I'd be like, I've already done my homework.
Who were some of your early female influences in terms of people you looked up to or learned from? And these can be real people or fictional.
I guess growing up till probably before I started uni, the strongest role model, the female role model would be my mum, because I'm always surrounded by her. She'll be taking me to school, making dinner. She's always around because she didn't work. So she was a housewife. So she did work in a sense. And I don't know, I think it showed that she did so many things with the hours that she had. She'll be up before everybody. She'll be the last one to go to bed. And I know with the little, like, she didn't know a lot of English and she wasn't that great with the other subjects as well. But the one thing that she could help us with was our Vietnamese work. And so she would dedicate her time to help coach us in that, because that's what she could share with us. Whereas with the maths and all the other stuff, Dad would jump in to help. And I think it's just amazing. It's like, you know, she showed what she could do with her limited, I guess, knowledge of being the school curriculum and all that stuff, and still try to contribute to our learning in which way she can, and being supportive and just being very resourceful. She was always very resourceful, very creative. And most of our clothes she made herself, because you know, Dad it's a one income family and he was working in a factory and all that stuff. It's not like we had like excess money. So she would, her cousins had a factory where they made a lot of clothes, and therefore the cuts off and all that stuff, she would just grab that and recreate clothes for us, which was really cool. We got really cool clothes that were very unique, designed by Mum, uniquely designed by Mum, which was great. But yeah, she was definitely my I guess my inspiration for being creative and staying creative.
She sounds amazing. Mothers are incredible.
Agreed.
No, I think that's really beautiful. I can identify with that. I was just thinking, I was trying to cast my mind back to the question, and if it was women who influence us in our childhood or beyond, and I couldn't quite remember. I was thinking of all the different women. But as Belinda, you were talking about your mum, it was really beautiful. I was thinking of the similarities to my mum, and she's definitely someone who is an inspiration. She also, we weren't very well off growing up either, but both my parents worked, but you know, there still wasn't very much money. And she made all our clothes too. She made our school uniforms. She made like for like the Irish parades, she'd make like the Irish clothes for us. My sister did Irish dancing and she made some of the dresses. She made her own wedding dress. And when we had our first communion, like my sister had her first communion, she changed the wedding dress to be her communion dress. And then when it was my communion, she changed it again because I was a little bit smaller at the time, so it came down again. So yeah, very thrifty. I still cannot sew near as good as her. Doing a French seam, she's like, I don't have the patience. Mums have so much patience. And she would actually work at night a lot of the time because she, you know, we couldn't afford to have anyone look after us when we weren't at school. So my dad would work during the day and then my mum would work at night, but means my mum hardly actually ever got to sleep, which is kind of crazy. She'd get like, you know, 3 to 4 hours a day, keeping up with all of the housework, looking after the kids, everything. I only actually, of course, I didn't know this at the time. I found this out as an adult and I was just shocked how much, you know, she sacrificed and Mum's sacrificed for us. Yeah, and I had an amazing relationship with her. I think probably one of the, like, I was of the kids, I was probably closest. I did look up to her. I asked, you know how lots of daughters, like, you know, don't want to tell their mum certain things or whatever, which was more like my sister. I would always go, we can just tell Mum, we'll ask Mum's advice. And my sister Natalie would go, no, we're not asking Mum, don't ask Mum. And I'd be like, she won't mind, we'll just ask her. And she's like, no, we're gonna keep it a secret from Mum. Yeah, so I do remember, you know, I guess I was a kid for a really long time and really enjoyed my mum's security. She kept us really safe. She was very compassionate, very caring. You know, I still had some blow-ups with her. But the other person is my sister, actually, who I really looked up to, especially as a teenager. She actually moved to the UK for about 5 years when I was a teenager. And every Sunday night, it was pre-mobile phones. So every Sunday night, I would spend about 5 hours on the phone to her and just download my entire week, talk about my boy troubles, talk about uni, all the fun things, asking her advice. But maybe by this stage, I was asking my sister more advice than my mum. So yeah, and when we were kids, I hung around her like a bad smell. There's a video of her and her friend doing a dance to Kylie Minogue, and me in the background trying my hardest, don't know the steps, but trying to imitate them. And she's trying to shoo me off camera because I'm a bad smell. But they still looked up to her. I think that's very normal. You look up to your older siblings. And then I had a lot of teachers, female teachers, who I looked up to. My year 5 teacher, Miss Paik, she was very, her energy, she encouraged me a lot. The way she encouraged me, the way she questioned me to do things and whatnot, I always felt very inspired by her. And then in high school, my art teacher was hugely encouraging. She would actually ask me to help her edit and critique the works in to develop that skill as well, which I thought was always really nice. And she just really opened my eyes. She was very supportive. And then my English teacher, the same. I just was amazed by their intelligence and how much capacity they had and their generosity when they were teaching us. And I just felt like I really connected with them. And then when I was in uni, I worked for the brand Figgins Holdings, which was at the time was Australia's biggest Australian owned retailer, and they owned shoes. And I worked for Malini Shoes was the brand. And my boss, I still think about her to this day, the shop boss. But I was going through uni on the sales floor. Her name's Siobhan, and just life mentoring, anything that I did, just anything that I was talking about was going through uni. She was just like a sounding board, and such an incredibly thoughtful woman who had so much perspective. She was almost like a psychologist. I worked there for 4 years in uni, and I worked there because of her. She was incredible. And I have horrible periods. I would get to work, be doubled over with period pain. She'd go upstairs, lie down, and 5 hours later I'd come back down and she wouldn't have batted an eyelid. She wouldn't say your pay's docked or anything like that. And I'm a casual, because we had such a good relationship. So in terms of caring for another human, she was incredible. I still think about her. I don't know where she is. I don't know how to contact her. She's got no social media because I went overseas, and I think about it. I dream about her. So I want to find her. Sorry, I've waffled on for ages. There's lots of women.
I love that. It's crazy how some people can have such a big impact on your life, especially with something like that. What are some cultural gendering norms that surprise you in your life? For example, expectations around housework or the way in which women are supposed to behave. And I'm really interested in your takes on this, especially because you both were talking about your mums at the start of that question. Yes. Who would like to go first? Belinda, you were nodding your head. I feel like you've got something to say.
Well, yeah. So I think I'm very much I believe that I kind of challenged much of that status quo now. I think the minute I moved more towards uni and was doing all that stuff out beyond just the family unit, you kind of see a little bit different, to see it from a different perspective. So at home, mum did most of the housework, dad would do the gardening and all that stuff. And then I was laughing when you were asking it, because I was having this chat to my sister the other day, because she was like, I need the lawn mowed. And I was like, why can't you do it? And she's like, no, I'm waiting for my boyfriend to do it. And I'm like, but why? She's like, it's a boy's job. I'm like, it's not a boy's job. You can do it. And she's like, no, it's a boy's job kind of thing. And I think it's just like little things. I think she was half joking, half not, but I think it's those little things that we grew up as. And I'm seeing more change now that, you know, when my cousins and having kids now, they don't, you know, paint their boys' room blue, or they don't say that the boys can't play in the kitchen or whatever it may be. Because I went to IKEA the other day with grandma, and I was like, I saw this really cute kitchen play set, and I was like, oh, let's get it for baby Luca or baby Flynn. And she was like, no, they're boys, don't get them this. And I think it's just that those little comments that you kind of get growing up, and you don't really pick on that and you don't notice that, it just becomes a norm. And when it's not called out, it continues to become a norm. I'm hoping I'm answering the question and not just rambling on. But yeah, so when I teach and I do academic coaching, and when I talk to the girls that I teach, and even the boys, right, and I ask them, what chores do you guys do at home? And it's very similar stuff. And I challenge them. It's like, why don't you guys swap and see how you guys feel about it? Or that, why don't you, you know, challenge it? And I think till this day, my family, the older generation, still has that very, this is a boy thing, this is a girl's thing. And it's very, and I really am very, I have very strong feelings about it. And I've expressed myself every time we have like a family gathering and the boys are offered alcohol, like, you know, beer, here you go, have a drink. And then I'm like, why am I not offered one? He's like, girls shouldn't be drinking. I'm like, no, everybody shouldn't be drinking because that's bad for your liver. But but if you're offering them one, I get one too. But yeah, so, you know, the very little things, and I call it out because I have younger cousins, and, you know, the little nephews and stuff will be growing up, and I want to make sure that they understand that it's not a norm to say boys can do this and girls can't do this, or girls can do this, but it's not a boy's job kind of thing. And, you know, I think it's about standing up for that and making sure it's heard, and not just like, oh yeah, they're just joking, let them joke. And even though it's mom and dad or grandparents and they're very senior, you still have to correct them, like, I guess, educate them in a way that so they don't carry on that norm that they've lived with, and give that to the younger generation that we have in the family. But yeah.
Belinda, that was such a good response. I'm like riding that high still.
Sure was.
All right. Eddie, what are some cultural gendering norms that surprise you in your life? For example, expectations around housework or the way in which women are supposed to behave.
Yeah. Yeah, so I distinctly remember, I mean, my household was the jobs of obviously my mum and my dad were very gender specific. Like, my mum basically did all the parenting single-handedly. My dad was the breadwinner and brought in the money, and then literally everything else was up to my mum. And so I remember arguing when I was a kid. You know, I don't know, I'd have to bring the clothes off the line or fold the laundry, and yeah, you know, Robbie or Barry would do the mowing, for example. And I was so, plus we had a rider mower, which was so fun. So I would get really grumpy and go, I'm not taking the clothes off the line, I'm doing the mowing. So I would do the mowing. So, you know, there was a point where my parents were like, who cares? We don't care. Just do someone do the jobs. So you could raise it, and you definitely could argue with them, but it's still they're very steeped in as you said, Belinda, steeped in the traditions that we've learned, and it takes years and years, and I think generations to unlearn or to even realize what we're doing. But some things that have surprised me even about myself. So I am, you know, reasonably aware, but recently with Grace Tame, I think I talked to you about this, Sam. Grace Tame, her response as the Australian of the Year, and, you know, looking really unimpressed for media and all of that. And I realized how conditioned I still am. And I really appreciated what she did, because I realized that I would be a person that wouldn't ruffle any feathers. If I was in a social setting, and so, even if I didn't like the person or they'd wronged me in some way, I wouldn't make it obvious. I would be civil, I'd be polite, I'd do all the right things that you're supposed to do. And I thought, oh gosh, I'm so conditioned still. So yeah, that surprised me recently, because I think the question was around, I wanted to answer being surprised. And there was another thing I wanted to answer being surprised about. A family friend as well recently, we were around, and Mark, it was a girl, she was 5 years old, and Mark and her were playing in the pool. Mark's my partner, and she pointed to Mark's underarm hair, and she talked about hairy underarms and was like, oh, what's that? And then her mum quickly goes, oh, you don't have to worry about that, you'll get rid of it when you're older. And I went, whoa, that's a personal choice. Whether you get rid of it or not, just like, I could not believe. And this is recently, and this is a 5-year-old girl. She's being told already that she has to get rid of her underarm hair. But it wasn't from a bad place, for example, from mum. That's her expectation and that's her setting. So yeah, I think it's so, there's so much to undo.
Another thing to undo, and I think it is really that growing up, right? I have a really close friend. She's lovely, really, but we were talking because she's getting married soon, and we were just talking about how she's going and how she's feeling, and she was talking all about that, and she was like, we're talking about pay, and she was like, how do you feel if you made more than your partner? I'm like, for me, that's a non-question, right? That it doesn't matter who makes more. It's like, you're a unit. You shouldn't be measured by that. But she was like, nah, her partner makes a lot more than her and she feels okay, but also there's a competition. But she said it's okay, but if she were to make more than him, she would feel uncomfortable. And I'm like, but why is that? And she's like, I don't know. I don't know, and she couldn't answer me. And I think it's just these things, that's the unconscious bias where you see in the Disney movies where girls are the damsels in distress and the boys come in prancing on a white horse, and it's just like that mentality that's ingrained into your childhood that you don't know why, but when you're older you're still having that kind of image in your head where the male figure in the household is the breadwinner, or the male figure is the protector or the security provider. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying that it's, it surprised me when she was like, it will make me feel uncomfortable, but I do not know how to explain why. And it made me think, is it because of how we grew up and all these messages that were like, communicated to us, whether directly, indirectly, or whatever, is just ingrained this unconscious bias in us now.
That's such a great point, Belinda. Like, we start things or we think things without even considering why in the first place. We get on this little train of doing the things that we're taught, and we don't stop to think, why are we doing it like that? Does that serve us, or is that a good thing, or maybe we could do it differently? And it's only like, it's really nice to hear that you like obviously really gently challenge your friend, or even asked her why, and got her thinking about, why is it that I'm uncomfortable? Because hopefully now she's reflecting on that.
There's a book about, it's literally a book about how to get a man to like you by appealing to his masculine side. I found the link, I'll send it to the two of you. Your faces. To anyone listening to the recording, if this makes it in, they both look horribly shocked. All right, so we've done a lot of talking so far about how your family and your cultures have kind of impacted your views on gender stereotypes, and being a woman in the world today. Now I want to kind of shift the focus and talk a little bit about different forms of intelligence and work in your careers. So I think the best question to start this off might be, what was your career path to your current position, and perhaps perhaps just limit it to the last few significant roles that you feel have really shaped and impacted you.
Yeah, okay. So could probably define it by the industries that I've worked for. So I started out kind of after graduating. I traveled and I worked at the same time. I worked in advertising and branding, so much gender stuff going on there. That was in New York. So that was, I realized I absolutely hated working in that sector. Then I studied media and I studied theatre, so advertising, branding, media related, then moved into, came home from New York and back to Australia, and then moved into theatre producing and like company management. I did really love that. So I love that kind of operational side of things, and also producing, sets, actors, directors, everything. So it was a very hands-on kind of role. It was incredible. Again, I moved overseas. I traveled. I went to London. I worked in theatre for a little while, and then I moved into architecture. And then architecture actually was interesting because it's kind of like theatre on steroids, because you're creating things as well, but permanent things instead of temporary things, which are shows and sets. You're creating buildings. But again, I was in a support capacity in operations. So that, again, that's another, all of these industries, very creative. And that was an incredible experience. Then I moved back to Australia, and worked in architecture again for a little while. And then I've moved into Nomos, which is tech, which at first I was like, it's not creative industry, but being in tech, I'm like, these are some of the most creative people, different type of creative. I mean, I think personally, all people are very creative, and every industry can be creative because, solving problems, that's creative. So that's kind of an overview again, and I'm in operations now at Nomos. So again, it's, logistics, problem solving, being the gel, being the person that that kind of talks to everyone in a business. I've always been in that role, no matter where I've worked.
Okay, where do I start? Well, I think a significant point to make is I have a degree in science. Has nothing to do with what I'm doing right now. Absolutely, so far left field that you could not string it together. But yeah, so I did that, and then I guess it's not, for me, it's not so much the roles or the jobs that I had that shaped me, but it's more so bumping into the right mentors at the right time that help shape and guide me to, I guess, the next opportunities where I just said yes, and let's try to do it. And then the next one will come and they will guide me to the next one. I think the most significant one was when I was working in consulting, management consulting, and I was miserable because it was a very heavy, I guess, intense space. Unfortunately, it felt very much like a boys' club. In the office, not so much, but the after hours when you go out and do that socializing and all that stuff, it did feel like it, and I feel very left field again being in that situation. But I guess back then I didn't have very strong self of identity, and therefore morphed myself into this this character that allowed me to be part of that group. But again, when you're not yourself, you don't really shine. And in that role, I managed to run across my mentor. Her name's Kylie. She's still my mentor today. I think, Eddie, when you were talking about your sister, this is like, she was ticking the boxes just like Kylie. Like, I run to her for everything. When I'm typing up a quick email, it doesn't sound right. It's like, hey, what word should I replace this with? Kind of thing, right? And she is probably the most impactful person in my career, because every step I take, and if I trip or I have a question about it, she's there and she's realistic about stuff. Not beating around the bush just because I'm a girl. Sometimes I'm rambling all a bit, but it's important. I remember when I started with Essentia, I had this buddy, and he was great, and he was very nice to me. But then when I got like, you know, our relationship was stronger, I realized that he's actually really mean, like, you know, he's like tough love kind of thing, but he only did the tough love to the other boys. He sugarcoated a lot of stuff for me just because I'm a girl. I think he did that with the good intentions, but the fact that he treated me different because he purely thought that I couldn't take it because I'm a girl. And I pulled him up on that and questioned him about that as well. But I guess it was from a good intention, but I don't know, did not like being treated differently. And that was like my career within management consulting. And at the end of it, even with the great mentor, I just knew that it wasn't quite the right fit for me because it was too, I guess the word would be not purposeful for me. And so I really wanted to find something that I relate to. And I've always been in love with education, and I'm an academic coach and I tutor, and I've been tutoring since I was out of high school. And I think that connects me back into the education space. And I kind of became a learning designer with the university for workplace capacity. And then naturally gravitated to become a product owner during COVID, and then built my agility expertise, and now I'm at Nomos.
And we're very lucky to have you. Belinda, kind of on what you've already gotten into a little bit. So do you have any stories about life in the workplace or outside of work where you were judged or treated in a negative manner because of your gender?
I'll make this one a quick one because I already kind of touched base on that, but it's that thing where it's not, I've never had it in a way that it was malicious or anything like that. I feel like there was a lot of male mentors that kind of sugarcoated a lot of things. I think a visual one you guys can imagine is the handshake. I think once we walked up together, my buddy and I, to meet this managing director, and he was just to introduce me. So he shook my buddy's hand nice and tight, but with me it was just like a little like soft touch, like touching, you know, kind of thing. I'm like, I can take it. But anyway, so, and that was one of the things. I'm like, the very initial piece, I'm like, just because I'm a girl, I don't get the proper, you know, handshake kind of thing. And I think that's, I guess the other one that I feel may not be true, and, you know, it's not so much being a female, it's more so being an Asian. I do feel that there is a bit of nepotism in certain projects I've been on, where people who feel like they're like each other gets the better opportunities or get to be, it's not so much, again, it's more the step beyond that socialization, right? Because they come up from the same culture, or that their style of socializing is the same. And therefore, naturally, they will go out and socialize and be able to build that rapport. Whereas when, you know, I don't like a certain way to socialize and I remove myself from those situations. And then naturally that becomes nepotism, as opposed to, you know, you're being treated based on what value do you deliver. And that made me feel quite uncomfortable. And I know it was the fact that I was a female. It was more fact that I was just, you know, just different in a way.
Yeah, it's interesting how, I'm not sure about you guys, but when it first starts happening, you think it's in your head until you lay it all out and you're like, actually, these are the concrete reasons it's real.
So I think I'm just as reflecting, Belinda, on your overview of your work history as well. And I love that you talked about so many mentors. And I was casting my mind back to all of my experiences. And I genuinely, besides Siobhan in the retail shop, she wasn't a work mentor, she was a life mentor, you know, selling shoes. I don't feel like I've had really strong professional mentors in my life. Nearly every job, I feel like I've been thrown in the deep end and been told, like, given no support and been like, figure it out yourself. You know, which part of me likes, but part of me, I'm sure I could do a lot of things better if I'd have been taught properly in different fields. So I was trying to think of like work incidents, but what struck me as well, and I think in my work choices, I've always shied away from any corporate environments. And I think I mean, this is me typecasting, but corporate environments can have more of that old boys club, more of that nepotism, you know, like all the jobs are supposed to be in white collar, but I've worked in industries where I'm sure it's still there, but maybe it's a little bit less obvious. So for example, I will never work for a company where you know, a dress code is dictated, like a corporate style dress code. Like I feel like the way you said before, you couldn't be yourself. I feel like I couldn't be myself in an environment like that. But I did have a really good girlfriend in high school, and then obviously uni, and then after school uni, and she worked in trading and dividends. And I would meet her in Sydney, like in the CBD after work, and go out with like a handful of her friends, which she was always the only woman. I think that's why she would invite me. And the men were always 15 years older. And I would get there and straight away, I'd be on high alert. I had this feeling that almost felt like I was the called in escort. Not from her, she didn't mean it like that, but it was awful. And the whole environment felt sleazy, felt wrong, you know, constantly your drinks were being bought. And I was like, I don't want any drinks, you know. And then I had a horrible incident where, you know, a man like kind of leaned up against the wall to me, and I literally ducked under his elbow to get out because I felt like he'd bought me a drink, and then I owed him something, and I was like, oh, I'm getting out of here. So that's definitely, I think you know, I was treated, I know that was in a social setting, but treated differently because of my gender and just that environment. But the other thing, working in architecture, I also worked on the construction sites a lot. I'd be on a construction site, but I'm trying to cast my mind back. I actually loved that. We were really fortunate. We had one set, like our main contractor for all of our projects. Me and him got along like a house on fire. But he definitely would make a lot of sexist remarks. He called me a Rottweiler once. Would he have called a man a Rottweiler? He said it with love, because he said, like, I'm a dog with a bone, you know, I won't let go, I wouldn't hold my point. But I suppose, would he have said to a man, you're a Rottweiler if you're standing up for yourself? Yeah, as I said, we did have a really good relationship. Or I'd go on site and I'd pick something up, and, you know, everyone, if for nice things, they'd rush around to pick up the fire hydrant or whatever I was moving for me because I wasn't strong enough. And I'd go, well, I can move this, it's, you know, it's fine. But I mean, it was also caring, some of the actions that would happen. Yeah, I guess you are kind of that sugarcoating you talked about, Belinda, like on maybe on a construction site, I was sugarcoated. Also helps that I was the client. It wasn't just my gender that I was, my sex, that meant it was sugarcoated for me. It was the fact that I was the client. So I'm the person, you know, I'm representing the person who's paying. They're going to be really nice.
I guess on the flip side of it, I remember once running a workshop, and I wasn't the lead of it, but it was more of like a hackathon thing, and everybody was in the room, but no one was making decisions. No one was doing anything. So, you know what, I stepped up, I grabbed the marker, and I'm like, okay, it sounds like these are the ideas that we have, pop it on the board, and blah, blah, blah. So I facilitated it, right? The minute we walked out, there was someone who came up to me, and he jokes a lot. He has a lot of dad jokes and all that stuff. And I don't think he meant it in a malice way again, but he said, that was a bit bossy. And I'm like, you wouldn't say that if a guy was facilitating, would you? Right? But it's just like those little remarks again. And I feel like none of these, and when you say these little things, they're not malicious. That I think it's also because no one's called them out on it and they think it's okay. And I think the first step is to build that awareness to these members of the workplace, so that they're aware and they stop it.
I would love your perspective on both the pros and cons of working with other women. Like, have you had examples of where, you know, other women have actually not have maybe pushed you down in your career or not helped you? And do you have any ideas on why that might be? And on the flip side, what do you love about working with other women?
I start because I have like this literally a juxtaposition of two mentors, one bad and one good. So the first one I had was that she's gone through a lot. So she was very senior, right? So she's got all this experience, and it was a lot of stuff that she could have taught me. But the thing I remembered most is that I told her that I was looking at, you know, continuing my coaching whilst doing the job. She's like, no, you need to pick one. You won't be able to do both. Simply, she told me that in her experience, she wasn't able to do both. And she was like, you know, it's going to burn you out. You're going to pick one. At that time, being very young in my career, and also it's this Asian culture thing where you got to listen to your seniors and you don't say no to them kind of thing. I actually stopped coaching. I stopped tutoring for a little while, and that made me realize that I missed it. I missed it more than doing the day job, and hence why I went back to it and I moved my career. So there was good out of it, but the fact is that to highlight, it's just like some of these people gone through a lot and they've done toughen it out, and they then somehow believe it's the only path. This is the recipe, follow it. Not that you can mold it, you can do it your way. The other mentor, going back to my favorite one, Kylie, like she is completely different to me, apart from the fact that she's Asian, but she's very different. I think the first time I reached out for her to ask for help, she was like, yeah, the Asian sisterhood needs to stick together. And it just really made me feel at home, and that I could come to her and ask her for anything and everything. And again, she was quite senior, but being able to go, yeah, of course, right? And I was like, I'm struggling with this. And she was so honest and supportive that I could be so vulnerable with her and be honest. And she was like, you know, she sat down and she assessed stuff with me and like, you know, this is what you want, or tell me what you want. And then she questioned it. It's like, why do you want it? And really bring out that purpose, like why? And that really, really helped me understand who I want to be and what I want out of my career and all that stuff. And I think the difference between the two is one had a fixed answer in her head before I even brought up what I'm thinking, whereas the other one listened, was very empathetic, and she just like, you know, okay, this is what you want, this is how we might be able to get you there, kind of thing. So very different. And I think it's just being young as well, when you start out your career, you need to really question if you want to take on a piece of advice someone is giving you. You need to remember it's just a suggestion. It needs to work for you. Just because they did something, it does not mean that it's going to work for you, and don't take it on board holistically, because, you know, everybody's individualistic, right?
Yeah, that is such an important perspective to keep on feedback. Eddie, same question.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess I'm thinking of all the different women I've worked with, and kind of how much I really enjoy working with women because of all the things we're taught growing up and whatnot. And you said it, like the empathy and the listening, it's the soft skills. And I'm not saying that men don't have these soft skills, they do, but they're not encouraged to utilize them and use them the way women are encouraged to utilize and use them. So I guess when I'm working with women, you know, I love that there's like a shorthand, or there's a sense of ease that and like for me personally, I mean, I suppose not with every single person, but overall, like, you know, maybe my guard drops a little, there's a bit less of a performance maybe. Again, these aren't necessarily fully gender specific, but it's because of all the things that both the male and male and female genders have been taught over the years. It just means that there's this beautiful shorthand in my experience with women. But then I've also experienced, this is actually not a negative, like I have never been, that I can recall, or been like brought something negative specifically to me with a woman, but I have had a woman, a really good friend actually, people struggle to work with this friend of mine, and sometimes I struggle to work with her. And it was actually, again, because of the things that we've been taught. She'd say sorry, like before she even started her question or something, she'd say sorry. She did have anxiety, so there were other things going on, but she almost couldn't get out what she wanted to say because of her fear and her constantly apologizing, her self-doubt, to the point where people wanted to stop working with her, and they couldn't see the nugget of amazingness this woman was and still is. I'm still her like really good friend. So I would find myself going, stop. I'm not going to listen to you if you apologize one more time. I mean, I tried all different things, but if you say sorry one more time, I'm blocking my ears for 2 minutes. These habits that we build up. So I guess, that can be a negative side. I find myself doing it as well. And I'm, sometimes I'm typing now and say, my apologies. I'm like, no, I'm not going to start that with my apologies. I'm just about to state a fact. I don't need to apologize. Yeah, so I think we all have these soft skills, but women are taught to bring them and use them. And I love using my soft skills and intuition, which all people have, but if we were all taught to use it a bit more, it would be nice.
Crazy sometimes how we're the ones holding ourselves back.
But in those points, I think it's that mentorship that I keep coming back to. It's just like when you doubt yourself and you have someone there to go, no, you got this. And sometimes you just need that. And, once you overcome it and you're in a good position, and then you give back and you do that to the next person next to you, right? But it's much harder to do it alone. And that's why you build your support network, you check in on people, and you make sure other people check in on you, and, you build that routine so that everybody grows stronger together.
God, yes, absolutely. It's so important that we have each other and that we hold each other up. What is something that gives you hope, or something that when you look at the women around you now makes you go like, hell yes, this is something bright, this is something good, this is something wonderful? Or what kind of world do you wish for the next generation of women?
I think touching on what Eddie just mentioned in her example is we need to stop apologizing. We need to own it. And I feel so excited because now I'm surrounded by people who are like that. They're not that we're unapologetic. Like when we make a mistake, we still say, I'm sorry, right? But it's the fact that we own what we bring to the table. We have a seat at the table and we know what we're delivering. We have a voice, and that we are supporting each other to make sure our voice is heard, not sitting back with a desk pad and taking down notes. It's no longer that era, and I think we're moving into a very exciting era where we can actually take this mentality and start from the very beginning, from primary school and high school, and we're teaching the girls, and we're empowering them to take on different responsibility that's not stereotypic.
All of these things have recently been coming to a head in modern history and coincided with my same time of landing at Nomos. So I feel like the support network of all the people at Nomos, men and women, even us, we're doing this interview with you, Sam. I'm watching you. I'm so proud of you. The way that you're asking us questions is incredible. The questions that you're asking are beautiful. So, that gives me so much hope. Like these kind of really personal things at work. Whereas, previously, I've never felt so, I've mentioned my periods once. I've talked about my periods so much more at this company than I ever have anywhere else. Except for to a handful of women, secretly to say, oh, I'm not feeling well, don't tell anyone, oh, I've got a stomach, and then to other people, I've got a stomach ache, things like that, where there's this sense of shame around our bodily functions, things that are happening to us. And I'm also really excited for, just on a wider scale, how, I alluded to it before with Grace Tame, how angry in a really good way women are getting and challenging, me included, not to think, oh, don't make a scene, do the right thing. You might not agree with something, but do it act in a certain way. And it's really nice now that we're seeing more and more people, women who are, you know, not acting the way that we've been taught to act for so long, and they're being role models. I mean, actually, it's not even, it depends on the subject. I mean, Greta Thunberg for me is like my bloody idol. She is amazing, and she's getting angry. I know it's not about feminist issues, it's about climate change. I'm sure I know she also talks about all sorts of injustices, including feminism. But, you know, she's so angry and doing something about it. So yeah, there's a lot of hope. I'm amazed by the generation that's following me, and learning from them.
So many amazing women. Well, thank you both for agreeing to be interviewed, and thank you both for your phenomenal answers. This turned out so much better than I ever could have thought it would have. And thank you both for your honesty as well. And that's it.
Thank you, Sam.
Hang out.
Thank you.